Welcome students to this lecture. We're going to talk about water. We've just learned about chemistry in the last lecture, and what we're going to do is talk about why water and the chemical properties of water can actually provide all of these important characteristics for life to be able to exist here on planet Earth. So life began in water, and it evolved there for about 3 billion years before organisms were able to leave water. But modern organisms still are tied to the water. Even humans, if you think about our lives, fertilization takes place in water. The gestation period takes place in water. And then even when we're born, with every breath that we take, that air must go down inside into our lungs and be dissolved in water before it can be taken advantage of. Our cells are composed of water. Most of our body is water. And so we're still tied to water. And it's water that provides the characteristics for life to be able to be present here on Earth. So let's re-examine the chemical structure of water. So it's H2O, and what I want to focus in on is that the electrons that are being shared covalently are shared unequally between the hydrogen atom and the oxygen atom. And so the electrons, in a sense, spend a little bit more time around the oxygen atom than they do around the hydrogen atom. And so there's a little bit of an unequal sharing that's going on. And so you end up with the entire molecule, the water molecule, has a side that ends up being a little bit more negative and then a side that is a little bit more positive. So we're going to watch this video. Okay, so here we can see that if we have a balloon and we rub it against like a fleece sweater, it becomes staticky, and then you can put it against this stream of water that's falling down, and instead of falling straight down, the water curves up towards the balloon, right? So in this case, we're filling up this cup, even though the cup is not directly below the tap of water, right? And so we can continue to fill it. We can change, in a sense, the direction of this water because there's some type of an attraction going on here, right? We can get the balloon, we can get this all the way filled up. We pull it away, it attracts it again. If we pull it away, it'll start to fall straight, and we can keep doing this until it's all the way. Okay, so why does the water bend towards the balloon? Well, it's because the balloon now, as it's statically charged, it has all these extra electrons, and so it's overall negatively charged. And remember that water has both a positive end and a negative end. And so what's happening is, as the water molecules are moving down, they're being pulled by this, they're attracted to or repelled from the negative charge of the balloon. Well, why do they all then go in one direction? Well, what happens is they all line up. It's kind of like when you have two magnets. And if you try to put two magnets together, the positive to positive, they don't work. But at some point, if you keep kind of pushing them, one magnet will like flip around, right? And that's what's happening here with the water molecules. They're all flipping around and aligning up so that their positive end is being directed towards the balloon. And so you get this overall movement of all of the molecules of water being attracted towards the balloon. And so this just shows that water molecules are attracted, right, to charged particles. But water molecules can also be attracted to each other, where if you can imagine, there's some water molecules that are positively charged on the one end and then negative on the other end, and they can line up in such a way that the positive ends line up with the negative ends and so forth. And so you get this stickiness to water, where water sticks to itself. We sometimes call this surface tension, right? We don't sing the song "Rain Molecules Are Falling on My Head." We sing the song "Raindrops Are Falling on My Head." Or if you've ever filled up water in a cup, it can go above the rim, right? That's because water sticks to itself. So if we come back and look at what's happening from one water molecule to the next, there is an attraction that's happening. A bond is being formed. And we want to specifically describe this type of bond. It's called the hydrogen bond. Now realize this is not the attraction of the hydrogen to the oxygen. Rather, a hydrogen bond is the attraction of one water molecule to another water molecule due to the fact that a water molecule is a polar molecule, where you have an overall negatively charged end and an overall positively charged end. And so you get these hydrogen bonds. Now these are weak electrical attractions, but they do exist. And therefore, this is why water has that stickiness, why water molecules stick to each other. Now, hydrogen bonds can also be found in many other biological molecules and in many other biological important cases. Here's one such case where in the DNA molecule, the reason that the two strands stick together and then coil around each other, you get the complementary base pairing of the nucleotides. The G's are binding to the C's and the T's are binding to the A's because there are hydrogen bonds between those complementary nucleotides. So because water sticks to itself, it has these two properties called cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion is the attraction of water molecules to themselves, whereas adhesion is the attraction of water molecules to other molecules or other substances or surfaces. And so this can be demonstrated here as the water creeps up the paper towels from one cup down into another cup, where it's demonstrating both cohesion and adhesion. Another example of this is in plants. I mean, how can you get water from the roots all the way up to the very top of these trees? Well, it turns out that inside of a plant there are these structures that are like these microscopic tubes. We call these the xylem, which are the tubes that the water flows through. And so if you can imagine there's water way down in the roots, how does it get all the way to the top? Well, water sticks to itself and it can stick to kind of the sides of these tubes and it can creep up through the tube. Furthermore, out in the leaves there is transpiration, or there's the water is being evaporated out of the leaves, and so you even have kind of a suction that's going on as well. And those three forces are working together, and that's how you can get water from just down in the ground all the way up to the tallest trees. Okay, so water also is important because it has a high specific heat. So what we want to show is if we look at this example where we have a cup of oil and a cup of water and we put them on a hot plate, right, and start to gradually increase the temperature. And if we watch this over time, what we'll see is that the oil went up 28 degrees, but the water only went up 13 degrees. So water heats more slowly. Alternatively, if we look at this and we put the same conditions and we put them in ice and we watch what happens, we see that oil cooled about 16 degrees, whereas water cooled only 8 degrees. So water cools more slowly. So this is what we mean when water has a high specific heat. It has the ability to take on lots of heat without changing temperature, or it has the ability to give off lots of heat without changing temperature. So let's look at the energetics of this hydrogen bonding. So here we have two molecules of water, and when this bond is formed, there's actually energy that is released. And so therefore the bonding of two water molecules is actually energetically favorable. We call this an exergonic reaction, where the net energy is released from this reaction. The forming or the breaking of the bond of two water molecules requires a little bit of energy. It's not energetically favorable. And this is what we call an endergonic reaction, where energy must be absorbed from the surroundings. So to illustrate this, let's think about this example. So if you put your finger into really cold water and really warm water, right, and stick it there for a little bit, and then bring your fingers back into just room temperature water in the same cup, you're going to your finger that was in the cold water is going to feel really, really, really warm, and your finger that was in the warm water is going to feel really, really cold, even though both fingers are in the exact same temperature. So this perception of temperature, of how cold something is or how warm something is, really has to do more with the idea of heat energy and the direction and the speed at which that energy is flowing. So when your finger was in the cold water and went into the room temperature water, the heat energy was flowing into your finger, and so therefore you felt warm. Whereas the finger that was in the warm water and then went into the room temperature water, heat energy was flowing out of your finger, and so therefore you felt cold. This can also be illustrated as you think about, a hot day where you go into your car, It's a really, really hot day and your car's been sitting there for a long time. You open your door and it's just blazing hot inside. So you sit inside, you grab your seatbelt, and if you grab the metal part, you're like, ow, your finger almost gets burnt because that metal part of the seatbelt is feels really, really hot to you. And so then you use the cloth part or the plastic part of the seatbelt in order to buckle up. Well, it turns out that the cloth or the plastic and the metal are all exactly the same temperature. They've all been sitting in that hot car for the same amount of time, and they all are actually the exact same temperature. It's just the perception of that temperature due to the heat energy transfer and the speed at which it's transferring. It's quicker from the metal to your hand than it is from the material to your hand. So that's just another example of how heat energy transfer and how we perceive that as temperature. Now, water also is important in evaporative cooling. Evaporative cooling is important, especially for organisms that need to maintain the same temperature in their bodies, and so. For example, if you're sweating or if you get out of a pool and you're all wet or whatever, as the water molecules bonds are being broken, and again, that requires energy. They got to get that energy from somewhere, and so they pull that energy as heat from the body, and so your body actually loses heat, and so therefore you start to cool off because the evaporation requires energy from the environment, and the closest thing is the body, and so you get a cooling off in the body from evaporative cooling. Now, the other thing that we need to talk about is the significance of water when it becomes ice. So, why does ice float, right? Well, the reason that ice floats is because when water becomes ice, the hydrogen bonds force water into a more crystalline structure, and this structure has the molecules more spread out than the molecules when they're in a liquid. Now, this is fairly unique because most materials are actually less dense as a liquid than they are as a solid. For example, metals are this way, right? But water is different. Water becomes less dense when it's frozen, when it becomes a solid, than when it is a liquid. And so therefore, this is why ice floats. Now, this is important because if ice did not float, if rivers or if lakes and ponds and the oceans, right, froze from the bottom up instead of from the top, you would essentially kill life in that lake every year, right? And that's not very favorable then to life. And so water freezes from the top because it floats. Ice is more dense, and so it floats, and so therefore the life can survive underneath that layer of ice on the top. In fact, that layer of ice even adds a little bit of insulation. Now, so this idea that water expands, right, when it freezes. You all know this if you've ever left a water bottle in the freezer. It expands out. This is important for life, but it also can be dangerous in some circumstances. For example, if cells are subjected to really, really low temperatures, those cells expand, they rupture, the cell dies, and you can get, if this happens across a large amount of tissue, you can get necrosis across tissue like this ear that was subjected to really cold temperatures and frostbite, and so many large portions of the ear died off. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is that water is important for life as a solvent. So remember that the dissolving agent is the solvent. So water is typically the dissolving agent, so it's the solvent of life. And the substance that's being dissolved is the solute. So in this case, if you put some salt inside of water, when you first dump it in, you can still see the salt crystals there. But pretty soon, if you stir it around or whatever, if you just let it sit, pretty soon those salt crystals disappear. Well, what happened? Well, remember that salt is sodium chloride, and it is a compound that is formed from an ionic bond. And so those ions then can separate. And the positive ion gets surrounded by the negative parts of water, and the negative ion gets surrounded by the positive parts of water. And so you've taken those ions and broken them apart, and so no longer do you see the crystals because everything has dissolved in water. And this is important because as water can dissolve different substances, you can end up getting different kinds of solutions that are either neutral, basic, or acidic. And each of these different conditions are important for life, to carrying out different kinds of reactions, whether it has to do with digestion or whether it has to do with other types of reactions that might need to occur in life. So this is just the quick lecture that we've given you of why water is so important as this molecule that is essential for life.